Hola amantes del cine de terror, bienvenidos a un nuevo video. Hoy es uno muy especial porque tuve la oportunidad de entrevistar a J.B. Blanks, director de películas de culto como Leyenda Urbana y Valentine, que me contó cómo fue hacer estas películas, además de otras anécdotas. Quiero agradecer a la gente de Cine Fantástico y Bizarro que me ayudaron para esta entrevista, además de que les escribí una nota sobre Valentine que pueden leer en la página, ahí abajo en los comentarios dejo el link para que puedan entrar, además de poder leer otras notas igual de interesantes. Así que sin más preámbulos, vamos con esta entrevista. Para empezar, ¿qué película te hizo fan del género y qué directores tuvieron una influencia en tu carrera?
It's definitely John Carpenter was the first director that I noticed. So it was The Fog, followed by, and it's also where I developed my interest in music because I'm a composer as well. So I grew up in the 80s with access to videotapes and lots of films, and I eventually worked my way through and saw everything. I got my hands on every horror film I could see, and it became something of a passion of mine, and I decided I wanted to make films myself.
Dirigiste un cortometraje que se llama Silent Number, que le da una vuelta de tuerca a la historia de la niñera que recibe llamados.
Yes.
¿Cómo se te ocurrió la idea y pensás que sirvió de base para Leyenda Urbana?
My father used to work for a phone company, and I think we drove past the cemetery one night, and I said, what if the phone was connected to a grave? And what if someone could talk to you from beyond the grave? I thought, I'll where the girl's alone at night, and she thinks someone's making prank calls, and then she starts to think it's something more serious, and then she tries to help save this boy, and it becomes a tragedy ultimately and kind of creepy. But the idea sort of came to me, and I wanted something just practically that I could shoot in a single location, because we only had about 5 days to make our student films. And some of my friends would be going all over town and shooting in different locations and wasting a lot of time just traveling. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to spend as much time as I could getting the movie to look good and to move the camera the way I wanted to. And I thought the best way to do. I wanted a film with a twist at the end, so that there was a reward for sitting through and watching the whole thing. I wanted it to pay off at the end. So it helped get the attention of somebody who was able to become my manager later in Hollywood. So I'm glad I made that movie, and I'm glad.
Originalmente te habían ofrecido los guiones de Scream y sé lo que hicieron el verano pasado. ¿Qué pensás que hubieran tenido diferente esas dos películas si las hubieras dirigido vos?
Oh, I don't know. I think Wes Craven did such a wonderful job as Scream. I don't know that I would have made a better film than Wes Craven. He's a master filmmaker who helped create the genre itself. Jim Gillespie did such a great job with I Know What You Did Last that it kept the door open for more of those movies to get made, and that's I Know What You Did Last Summer was a script that I got that I really wanted to make. It reminded me in some ways of John Carpenter's The Fog. It had similar kind of imagery with the fishermen and the hooks and the seaside town and the lighthouse and all that stuff.
¿Cómo fue la experiencia de haber hecho el falso tráiler de Sé lo que hiciera el verano pasado y qué pensás de la recepción que tuvo?
I knew a great location nearby, not far from my home, where I could shoot this trailer that I wanted to make, just to show the producers of that film that I knew how to make a film, that I could do good work with limited resources. And I got that film over a couple of weekends on 35mm. I was working at a company. I had access to cameras and editing facilities, and I shot the film. I think we only had about 15 minutes of film to work with, so I had to be very careful about how much film I was using and just be very economical and resourceful with my with the resources I had. So I'm really pleased with how that little trailer turned out, and that got in front of the producer of that movie. He'd already hired a director at that point, but he said to me he was so impressed with the film that the next horror film that he made, he'd give it to me to direct, and he came through. He was a man of his word.
¿Qué te llamó la atención del guión de Leyenda Urbana escrito por Silvio Horta?
Oh, I love that script straight away. The first thing I thought of when I read it was, why hasn't anyone thought of doing that concept before? It was such a clever idea, and urban legends were known all around the world. People have heard those stories for years. I'd even heard those stories in Australia. I knew I could imagine in my head how I would shoot the film, and I was so excited to get that opportunity.
Leyenda Urbana tiene uno de los mejores comienzos del cine de terror. ¿Cómo se te ocurrió la idea? O sea, ¿estaba en el guión? ¿Cómo fue filmarla?
Yeah, it was written in the script, and it was up to me to imagine how it would be shot. So I've got a very vivid imagination, so I was able to imagine that scene in my head many times before I ended up filming it. I designed it with storyboards. I revised my storyboards once we found the location, and worked with my production designer to design the gas station the way I wanted it, so that everything kind of was laid out in the right way for the camera movement and everything. I was very careful about how I shot that sequence. I had a very specific way I wanted to reveal the killer in the back seat with the flashes of lightning. So I just I spent a lot of time really trying to get that scene right, because I wanted to show the studio early on in the movie, during the shoot of the film.
¿Cómo fue trabajar con Brad Dourif, Robert Englund y Daniel Harris? ¿Los escogiste vos?
I chose all of them. I imagined Brad Dourif in my mind when I read the script. Service stations called B and B Gas on the sign, and that's Billy Babbitt. That was his character that he played in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He walked in to do an audition, and I said, I don't even need to see him audition. He's got the my casting director suggested Robert to me, and I was overjoyed that Robert would even want to do the movie, and I just offered him the role on the spot. And Danielle Harris, I loved from her Halloween movies and other films. She's done a lot of action films too, and I really wanted to find a role for Danielle in the movie, and I thought she'd be wonderful to play the roommate. I thought no one would expect that we'd kill Danielle Harris, so I thought it would come as a surprise.
¿Cómo fue dirigir a Jared Leto y a Rebecca Gayheart, que para mí se roba la película?
Oh, she does. She was extraordinary, and she auditioned several times. It was down to Rebecca and one other actress, and she just completely came and claimed that role. She was just brilliant to work with, a wonderful girl. I'm still a good friend with Rebecca, and she really did steal the movie, and I'm so proud of her performance in the movie. And I think a lot of people love her in the film. And Jared was the one actor that I didn't cast. He already, the studio desperately wanted Jared in the movie. I wasn't that aware of his career, but he was the one actor that the studio insisted on being in the film, and he was wonderful to work with.
¿Cuál es tu escena favorita?
I've got a couple, but I think the scene in the radio station is pretty special with Tara Reid. She did her own stunts. She was hanging from those stairs for real. I'm really proud of all of the movie, but I think that's a really great scene, and I think it really holds up, and it's a lot of credit goes to Tara for that.
¿Viste las secuelas? ¿Qué pensás de ellas?
I've only seen the second one, and I think John Ottman did a really great job. I still haven't seen the third one, but I plan to see that very shortly when the new box set comes out in England. I'm gonna get a copy of that and watch the third film.
¿Qué te llamó la atención del guión de Valentine?
Oh, I just thought it was a wonderful chance to do a throwback to a classic 80s slasher film. I wanted to do a really clever version of the film, and I wanted to work with pretty much an all-female cast in that movie, and I just thought it would be really fun to follow some. They're not college-age girls; they're like all professional women, and it was really fun to do a film with all those wonderful actors. I was immediately drawn to Valentine because I loved the imagery of the cherub. I could imagine how I could design a really scary mask, which I think the mask turned out beautifully. And it was also a chance to do a bit of a giallo, an Italian kind of. It's very similar to some of Mario Bava's movies, and I love those giallos. So I always saw Valentine as a bit of a slasher giallo hype.
¿Cuáles son tus slashers favoritos?
Oh, Halloween is my favorite of that genre. I think Halloween's wonderful. I think it's pretty hard to beat that film. And Deborah Hill, the producer and the writer of Halloween, was a good friend of mine before she passed away, and I got to meet her many times, and she was a mentor to me. And I've always loved Halloween. I don't know how many times I've seen that movie, but I think it's a masterpiece, and I don't think anyone's ever quite equaled it.
¿De dónde salió la máscara del asesino?
It came from I remember going and buying books on Botticelli the Renaissance painter, and I found images in that he painted of cherubs, and I found one in particular that I loved, and I wanted to replicate that classic kind of. It's a piece of Valentine iconography, and I wanted to create something iconic like that. I always thought I love that film, My Bloody Valentine, but they use a miner's mask in that film, which worked great in that movie. But I just thought if I was going to do a Valentine slasher film, I want to have a mask that's appropriate to the day. I think originally in the script when I read it, it was a pig's mask or something, and then we changed it to a cherub, and I'm really glad we changed it.
¿Cómo fue trabajar con todo este cast de jóvenes actores como Denise Richards y David Boreanaz? ¿Fue distinta la experiencia de lo que venías haciendo?
They were wonderful as well. I've been very lucky with all the movies I've made. I've always worked with wonderful actors, and Valentine was no different. The girls were just so beautifully prepared and professional, and they all got along so well, and they all wanted to make the movie great. They supported me massively, and I tried to support them throughout the movie. We were a great little family on Valentine, and everyone really wanted to do great work, and Denise was just a wonderful person to work with. She had to do some difficult scenes in the spa with the drill for a couple of days, but she never complained once, and she was a total trooper. We just kind of laughed all the time behind the set. We were just having a good time making that film. So.
Hiciste 2 slashers. ¿Te consideras un experto?
Oh, I don't think I'm an expert. I just someone who loves the genre a great deal, and I've probably watched a lot more slasher movies than the average director. So I'm a bit of an expert as an audience member. But every film's different, and every film's got different requirements, and there's a lot of things that go into making a movie. Just the stuff that we put in front of the camera is just part of it. It's a very complicated job with lots of moving parts, and I just always try and do the best job I can. But
después de esa película te tomaste un descanso para volver con Storm Warning. ¿Qué te atrajo de ese proyecto?
I'd had several projects between Valentine and Storm Warning that I was attached to that didn't happen for one reason or another. So I was very keen to move back to Australia and make a film in Australia. I'd never made a film back home, and I'd never made an independent movie. My first 2 films have both been made for studios, so I wanted to have a chance to do my little independent film. And I got to also work with one of my favourite writers, Everett DeRoche, who wrote some of the greatest Australian thrillers of the 70s and 80s. And it was the first chance I had to make a film that was going to be almost entirely done on a soundstage with sets. We built the farmhouse, the barn, and the yard around the farmhouse. That was all inside a studio. So it was a wonderful experience for me, having control of the lighting and the environment, and not being at the mercy of the elements every day out on location.
Hiciste también el remake de Long Weekend. ¿Cómo llegaste a ese proyecto?
Well, that was another script by Everett DeRoche. And we talked about remaking Long Weekend while we were doing Storm Warning. It was one of my favourite films of his, and it hadn't been seen by a lot of people, the original movie, at the time. It wasn't that easy to find. I think there was an American DVD of it, but it was a pretty rare film to see, actually. We just thought it was a great story to tell because it was an ecological, sort of environmental thriller, and it seemed like a good time to tell that story again, about sometimes how human beings don't quite fit into their environment, how they can be toxic to the very world around them and to each other. It was a chance to do a film with only 2 actors, and that was just a joy working with Jim Caviezel and Claudia Carvin. They're both wonderful actors and done some incredible work, and it was a highlight of my career actually getting to work with those 2 actors. They were just magnificent.
También compones música. ¿Cuáles son tus influencias?
Oh, I love Tangerine Dream. I love lots of stuff. I'm Christopher Young. I'm a huge fan of his. I've collected movie soundtracks all my life. So I love Charles Bernstein, who wrote Nightmare on Elm Street, and April Fool's Day and Deadly Friend. I love him a lot.
¿Cuáles pensás que son las diferencias entre hacer la banda sonora de un documental y hacerlas de una película de terror?
Oh, well, I love doing the documentaries because I get to change gears every time we move to a different film. So when I did the Canon documentary, Electric Boogaloo, 1 minute I was writing music for ninjas, 1 minute I was writing Chuck Norris music, another time it was Charlie Bronson films, but trying to give it an overall feel that sort of ties it all together.
Y la última pregunta es, ¿volvés a ver tus películas? ¿Qué memorias o recuerdos te traen cuando las ves?
They bring up all sorts of memories. I rarely can watch the film and experience it like any normal person would watch them. I always think of what we were doing on the set that day, or they always bring back really happy memories for me, because I've enjoyed making every one of my films and all the people I got to work with. It makes me think of those people that I worked with and how much fun we were having. And thank you so much, Santiago. You're a good man. You have a lovely day, and it was great chatting to you.
Y eso es todo, amigos. Muchas gracias por haber visto este video. Espero que les haya gustado, que les haya servido. No olviden compartirlo con otros fans del cine de terror o del cine en general. Y por supuesto no olviden suscribirse al canal y seguirme en las redes sociales. Hasta el próximo video. Soy el Funebrero González diciéndoles chau chau.